Right, it's time for this one. Now, Jake Paul, Tyron Woodley. When this came out, right, look, when this came out, or let's say just before it came out, rather. So, obviously, Jake had beaten Ben Askren, which, I mean, even at the time when we're going into that fight, you think, okay, he's had, 2 fights, 3 fights, beat up an NBA guy. You know, he did knock him out, to be fair. And then Ben Askren was a multiple MMA world champion, which, you know, obviously bear in mind he was just a pure wrestler with almost no striking ability. It was still seen as a bit of a big step up for Jake Paul to go in there and face Askren, who was pretty out of shape, and he got battered. But having watched the fight back, Askren did land a couple hits, and the head movement wasn't elite by any stretch from Jake, but obviously Jake got him out of there. Askren was bad, very, very, very bad. And I think that was probably the last time, for me anyway, that the sort of the banter stopped. Like, that was okay, cool, now we're into a different category, because I think Askren, obviously NBA, obviously Jake had fought 2 YouTubers before, which a lot of people are doing now. Yeah, rappers are fighting, former people are fighting. It's just all fun and games. And then he beats up an NBA guy. Okay, cool. Then he beats up Ben Askren, who's a world champion, multiple organization world champion in MMA. Then that was kind of the end of, all right, now are we taking it seriously? Like, we're not beating up celebrities now. We're beating up actual athletes and fighters. So Tyron Woodley gets announced, and obviously MMA, because being an MMA guy, your first thought is surely not, because everyone who's fought so far obviously it's just been for fun, NBA guys, blah blah blah. This is now the first time, obviously, that Jake Paul's fighting someone who can actually punch like that. You know, for everything else I'm going to get into, that's like, for me, that's the number one thing right now. Jake's fighting someone who can actually punch, like, regardless of age, experience, blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, no, this guy he's fighting can actually punch back hard. So that's number one. There's a lot of casual opinions and a lot of expert opinions. I'm neither of the two, but I have seen Tyron Woodley fight a lot, and obviously, like everyone else, we've seen Jake Paul fight 4 times. So there's some obvious things to get out of the way. First of all is age. Jake is 24, Tyron Woodley's 39. So that's, if any 24-year-old fought any 39-year-old, the advantage would be for the 24-year-old, of course. Size, Jake is 6'1", depending on which article you read or which Wikipedia page you read. He's tall, fairly tall. Woodley's 5'9", which, again, obviously height isn't really it is, but it isn't. Depends on what size you are. But Jake is if you see the face-offs, much taller. Size is a difficult one, because obviously Jake is not cutting weight. He doesn't cut weight to fight. He's at a natural 190. I think 190, 86 kilos or so. So Jake is around about that 190-ish. He might cut a little bit of weight to get in shape, but he's going to be around about that 190, 200 pound, 195 sort of area. Now, Tyron Woodley used to fight at 170. His whole UFC career anyway. So that meant he obviously had to cut down a lot, because he's big for 5'9", obviously big in size. He had to cut 15, 20 pounds. So he would probably cut, his natural weight would be around 190, that kind of range anyway. So in terms of weight, they're kind of similar. Jake could be a slightly heavier, obviously being a much taller guy, be slightly heavier, I think, natural weight. Now this fight, I believe it's at 190, which does suit Wood. Obviously, if they both had to cut, Jake, I don't think he'd cut that far, but especially being like an amateur, he hasn't really cut weight before to fight. So not cutting weight does help people like Tyron Woodley, because he's one of those guys who, when you've cut a lot of weight, gets very, very depleted to get down to 170. So he'd fight a lot of the time, like a lot of these big guys who cut a lot of weight, they'd be very, very diminished. So he doesn't need to do that, which does help. It does help, I think, if you've Tyron Woodley. So he can kind of get to a good speed, a good weight that kind of allows him to keep his power, doesn't get depleted. So that's another sort of aspect of it. Tyron Woodley's record in MMA was 19-7-1. So there's 1 draw, 19 wins, 7 losses. 4 of those losses have come in his last 4 fights. So he was pretty unstoppable. He was very, very good. World champion, UFC welterweight world champion for a long time, defended the belt for a long time. Then he ran into Kamaru Usman, who is, Kamaru Usman's one of the greatest welterweights of all time, period. He's the greatest active UFC fighter, and MMA fighter probably, pound for pound of the world, because John Jones isn't really active and Khabib retired. So Usman is basically the best in the world, one of the best of all time, period. And Woodley lost to him. And after that, Woodley kind of went off a skid, lost to Gilbert Burns, who's a top contender. Colby Covington, top contender, like number 2 in the world. And they lost to Luque, who's kind of up and coming. So in terms of Tyron Woodley's MMA career, he's on a 4-fight losing streak. Here's another thing as well. He hasn't knocked someone out since Robbie Lawler, since he won the belt in 2016. So there's that. So in terms of UFC career, it's definitely going down. And his last couple of fights have been, apart from the Luque fight, the 3 previous, he looked a shell of himself, didn't look that interested, got outworked, outbeaten, just everything in those 3 fights. The Luque fight, he was much, much better. They just got caught in a choke. So in terms of MMA, in terms of like what have you done for me lately, it's not a whole lot. In terms of, it's quite bad. I mean, yeah, bad. Now, the Woodley's background, he's a NCAA Division 1 wrestler, so that's like the highest form of collegiate wrestling. So he's an elite wrestler, and he's also a jiu-jitsu black belt. So in terms of MMA, he's great. So see all the facets of MMA, that's fantastic. Striking wise, he's always been a power puncher. Obviously, given the explosiveness and the size and the wrestling base, he's going to be very, very explosive, and he's got heavy hands. But obviously, being a wrestler, you're going to be more. He's not an outright strike. He's not a Conor McGregor or Israel Adesanya. He's a wrestler who's got hands. So he's never been. So again, more of these sort of not rumors, but sort of like fallacies that kind of come around. Like, he's not a striker. That's not his thing. He's not a striker. He is a power puncher though, and he is dangerous. Like, dangerous. If you in their prime, I mean, he was at the time. Joe Rogan described him as the scariest puncher in the UFC. So at one point, which is granted probably about 3 years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, when he was in his 36, when he was still pretty old, he was described as the scariest puncher in the UFC anyway. So they're all the sort of, I mean, you can make of this what you want. So you can take all these things and be like, okay, cool, that, just so you have all the facts before people say, oh, he's going to win or he's going to win. So they've both been active enough. So Jake fought twice in 2020, and he fought in April this year against Askren. Woodley fought in September, and he fought in March this year. So in terms of activity, they're both fought kind of recently. They've both gone through fight camps recently. Obviously, Woodley went through a 5-round and an early stoppage against Luque, and obviously Jake had 2 first-round knockouts. So in terms of actual in-fight, in the ring or in the octagon experience, it's kind of obviously level. Obviously, Tyron Woodley's been fighting for however many years, and Jake's been fighting for 3. So, with all that being said, boxing fans / casual fans / whoever are of the opinion that because Jake's been doing pure boxing for 3 years, he should beat Tyron Woodley. Now, I mean that on paper, somebody who whoever trains boxing for 3 years, that does not give you the automatic passage to beating anyone in boxing, regardless of their experience. So there's no way, for example, if I started training boxing, this is a pretty terrible example, but run with it. If I started training boxing for 4 years, that I could beat someone in UFC who isn't a pure boxer, who is of my size. Like, it just doesn't Like, the logic's there. The logic is there, but I feel like people are taking shortcuts because it's Jake Paul. I'm not sure where Jake Paul's either terrible, according to people, or he's going to beat a former UFC welterweight champion that can actually punch, who's been in the ring with killers, and he's defeated killers for a long time while Jake was doing Disney. And now Jake's been knocking out YouTubers, NBA players who are smaller than him. It wasn't like a 6 or 7 NBA player, he was a small NBA player. And then a wrestler. Ben Askren one was good. Like that, that's one of those you can actually put down. Okay, cool, we did knock out Ben Askren. That's, whether Ben Askren was, he was retired, but, that is what it is. Beating Ben Askren was definitely a tick. But if we're looking at, like, if you break it all down, on paper, there's no way any sane person would say, yeah, Jake Paul is going to defeat that person based on what I can see in front of me. The only thing that the glaring one is the age. Now the skill, like, if you're telling me Jake has got the talent after 3 years and beating NBA players and YouTubers and Ben Askren to defeat Tyron Woodley, like, that logic just doesn't. 2 + 2 is not adding up. Like, to me, that you're coming up at 5. Like, there is some logic in there, but I feel like the whole thing isn't being explained. For me, I look at it every which way. I look at the build up, I look at the press conferences, I look at the X fights, I look at the records, the stats, the size, and I'm just struggling. And I can't say with any confidence that Jake's going to beat Tyron Woodley. Like, I can't. The only reason why you would say that is because Tyron Woodley's 39 and he's had 4 bad fights. But that logic applies to if he was fighting Kamaru Usman tomorrow, or Colby Covington, or Luque, or Poirier, or McGregor. Like, that's where that logic. It doesn't apply to Jake Paul, who's been boxing for 3 years and hasn't beaten anyone of Tyron Woodley's ability. Like, to me, that's just really, really important, regardless of how I feel about it. Because personal opinion, I don't really mind Jake Paul. I think he's done a good job he's done a great job. He's done a Floyd Mayweather style job in getting people interested. But as Conor McGregor found out, it only works when you win. And Mayweather obviously only works when you win. You have to keep winning. And obviously the last 2 people he's fought, Jake, 37. They've both been 37 years older. Nate Robinson was 37, Askren was 37, Woodley's 39. So be careful what logic. If you're applying this boxing logic to Jake Paul when he's knocking out 37-year-olds, it's hard for me to really follow it. But there are certainly truths to it, and there are facts. Woodley's lost 4 in a row. Woodley's 15 years older. He's smaller. He's maybe the motivation might not be there. To me, the motivation is good. Like, this should be on paper the best version of Tyron Woodley that we can get. He's had enough time training. He's trained with Floyd Mayweather. He's been working on his boxing. He does have this is the thing. He does have hands. This is the difference between Tyron Woodley and everyone else that he's fought. Like, granted, they're all 37. They're all old. Jake's in his prime athletically, or getting to his prime athletically. He's in great shape. 6'1", great size, great speed. All of that. But Tyron Woodley can punch. Like, this is what people don't. People are not really taking. They're kind of seeing the. I think the biggest the biggest pro Jake Paul thing has to, like I said, has to be the age. Because if it was 2013, there's no way. Like, this is what I would actually be very, very curious to see. There's people who are saying that Jake's experience, his 3-year experience, is the reason why he's gonna win. Like, I want to see if that applies to anyone else. Like, stick anyone else in there. Like, anyone else at cruiserweight or super middleweight. Like, this is what I really want to know. Like, what's the level? Because Tommy Fury, who's the person who's they're kind of linking to him, he's 22, same sort of size. He's 6-0. In the same time period Jake has been fighting YouTubers and Ben Askren, Tommy Fury is 6-0. And Tommy Fury he's been boxing his whole life. So if you stick Jake Paul against Tommy Fury, sure, Tommy Fury should walk through him. So, but Tommy Fury, Tyron Woodley would be a fight. So, listen, for me, the verdict, I'd be stunned. This is what I'm gonna go on record and say. I'd be stunned if Jake Paul stops Tyron Woodley. early, like in the I think it's an 8-round fight. If Jake Paul takes out Tyron Woodley in the first 3 rounds, like that to me would be shocking, like shocking. If they share the first 2 rounds, it's a bit cagey. Tyron Woodley doesn't have the energy. Jake's fresh, lands the punches, or the judges split decision. 4 rounds to 3, or whatever it might be. It'd still be surprising because I just can't imagine down the stretch that Jake would have more than Tyron Woodley, who's been doing this whole life. This would be the last time. I mean, I've been let down by Tyron Woodley before. And I've not really got any personal vested interest in it because it is boxing. Like, this is the thing with these MMA boxing things. When the MMA guy goes to boxing, like McGregor, like whoever else, it's on their terms because everyone knows if you go to MMA, you get killed. So it's not. So we know there's levels. There's the MMA and then there's boxing. So boxing, if we're just going hands, the MMA guy goes, okay, cool, we'll just use hands. There's obviously that's why it's a bit of a contest. So yeah. That's what my prediction. I think Tyron Woodley's going to win the fight. Logic tells you he's going to win the fight, but the age thing is a problem. The pure boxing, even though it's 3 years, that is a factor for sure. And obviously given Tyron Woodley's last 4 fights have been losses, granted to absolute killers, but still losses. There's no momentum saying, all right, yeah, he's on form. Tyron Woodley should walk through it. So I can't wait I just want to see how this plays out. I'm fascinated to see how this plays out. If Tyron Woodley goes in and knocks him out in 2 rounds, it wouldn't be a shock. It'd be like, okay, cool. Well, obviously, if it looks how it could or it should on paper, Tyron Woodley goes in there, lands early. Like, Tyron Woodley will land on like, this is the thing. Tyron Woodley will land on Jake Paul because Askren landed on Jake Paul. And Tyron Woodley's better than Askren, so Tyron Woodley's going to land on Jake Paul. Now, the 2 things are going to be, can Jake Paul take that? And can Tyron Woodley, well, who's got the gas tank out of the 2? I don't know if Jake Paul can go 8 rounds if he's got the cardio for that. Tyron Woodley's got cardio for days. He can go, maybe not 39. In boxing, cardio is kind of different. 8 rounds, 2 minutes, 8 rounds, 3 minutes. Just, similar to a 25-minute title fight, but we will see. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Because again, I'm not really got a personal vested interest in it, but it's just logic. To me, I'm like, just show me that make it make sense. Make this make sense to me. I just want to see that this thing makes sense. Because if Tyron Woodley loses this, then Jake can kind of go after it until he fights Gervonta Davis or Canelo or someone who can actually beat him up, and then the show's over. But this is the one. Obviously, last fight was the one. It's like, okay, is he absolute fraud? Or can he box? Okay, cool. Jake Paul can box. I've never said he can't box. Jake Paul can box. Okay, cool. Now sticking with Tyron Woodley. Boy, oh boy. But we'll see. We'll soon see. Very much looking forward to it. And we'll see next week who's right. And if the Jake Paul Roadshow continues. Back next week. Watch this space.